You know what loners see that everyone else pretends doesn't exist? There's a pattern running beneath every social interaction, and most people have trained themselves not to notice it, but loners see it clearly. Watch what happens at workplace team lunches. Colleagues perform exaggerated interest in each other's weekend stories, nodding too enthusiastically, laughing too loudly at mediocre jokes, asking follow-up questions they clearly don't care about. The loner at the table notices something else: the micro-expressions between the performances, the brief flash of exhaustion when someone asks another question, the glazed eyes behind the engaged smile, the slight tension in shoulders maintaining the enthusiasm. Then later, in the bathroom or parking lot, the loner overhears the truth. Those same colleagues complaining about how exhausting lunch was, how they couldn't wait to get back to their desks, how they have to do this again next week. At family gatherings, a loner watches a cousin who drove 2 hours to attend. She's posting photos about family time, performing enthusiasm all afternoon, hugging relatives, smiling for cameras, saying all the right things about how good it is to see everyone. But the loner catches what everyone else misses: the jaw tension when asked to stay longer, the relief that flashes across her face when she can finally leave, the exhausted sigh in the driveway before she drives away. Everyone else accepted the performance as reality. The loner saw the resentment beneath. Here's what nobody talks about. Loners aren't missing the social cues. They're seeing too many of them. While everyone else focuses on the performance, loners notice the gaps between what people say and what their bodies reveal. And those gaps tell the real story. If this is resonating with you, hit the subscribe button and like the video. The pattern reveals itself everywhere once you start looking. People performing connection while resenting the obligation, maintaining relationships that drain them while pretending fulfillment, showing up to events they hate while claiming they wanted to be there. The performance is so normalized that calling it out makes you the problem. What loners see is the cost everyone else pretends doesn't exist. That forced enthusiasm isn't free. It extracts something from people. Every exaggerated laugh, every performed interest, every obligation fulfilled while hiding resentment creates a debt. And that debt shows up in the moments between performances, in the exhaustion people express when they think no one's watching, in the relief they feel when social obligations end, in the resentment that leaks through their careful facades. Loners see this cost clearly because they're not paying it themselves. They're not invested in maintaining the illusion that constant social engagement is fulfilling. They're not performing enthusiasm they don't feel. So they notice when others are. They catch the micro-expressions of relief when an event ends. They see the tension in forced smiles. They observe the energy drain that everyone else has normalized as just part of life. And here's what makes this uncomfortable for people. Loners see this without judgment. They're not criticizing the performance, they're just noticing it exists. But that noticing alone feels like an accusation. Because if someone is seeing the performance clearly, that means the performance is visible. That means it's not working as well as people thought. That means the gap between what they claim and what they experience is wider than they'd like to admit. So the loner's neutral observation gets reframed as harsh judgment. Their clear seeing gets called cynicism. Their accurate perception gets dismissed as negativity. Because acknowledging that loners are simply observing reality would require everyone else to acknowledge that reality exists, and that's too costly. Here's where it gets deeper. What loners are actually seeing is the gap between social mythology and social reality. Society teaches that connection is inherently fulfilling, that time with others energizes us, that relationships are always worth the effort. The mythology is so powerful that people perform belief in it even when their own experience contradicts it. They show up exhausted to social events and perform energy. They maintain draining relationships and perform gratitude. They fulfill obligations they resent and perform enthusiasm. The performance isn't conscious deception, it's learned survival. Because admitting the truth, admitting that much of social interaction feels like obligation rather than desire, like extraction rather than fulfillment, would require dismantling the entire framework they've built their lives around. So they perform. And they've performed for so long that they've almost convinced themselves the performance is real. Almost. But loners aren't performing, so they see the performance in others. They notice the disconnect between what people claim about their social lives and what their bodies reveal about the actual experience. They catch the moments when the mask slips, when someone's shoulders sag with relief as they leave an event, when exhaustion flashes across a face before the smile returns, when resentment leaks through in a tone of voice that doesn't match the words being said. These moments reveal the gap, and loners notice them because they're not working to maintain the mythology themselves. They're not invested in believing that constant connection equals fulfillment. So they see when others are investing enormous energy in maintaining that belief, despite evidence to the contrary. The hidden pattern is this: most people are exhausted by the very connections they claim sustain them. They're drained by the relationships they insist they need. They resent the obligations they perform gratitude for. But admitting this feels impossible because it would mean confronting a devastating reality, that they've been sacrificing their peace for something that doesn't actually fulfill them. So they hide it. They perform enthusiasm to convince others. They perform gratitude to convince themselves. They curate their social lives to look meaningful while privately counting down the minutes until they can leave. And they do this so consistently, so automatically, that they've stopped noticing they're doing it. Except loners notice. Loners see the performance clearly because they're not performing themselves. They see the exhaustion people hide. They catch the resentment people suppress. They observe the relief people feel when obligations end. And this seeing makes them dangerous, because once someone points out the pattern, it becomes harder to unsee. Once someone names the exhaustion, it becomes harder to pretend it doesn't exist. Once someone observes the gap between claimed fulfillment and actual experience, that gap becomes visible to everyone. And people can't afford for that gap to become visible. Their entire social structure depends on everyone agreeing to pretend the gap isn't there. The loner who sees and names the pattern threatens that collective agreement. So the loner must be dismissed, pathologized, excluded, not because they're wrong, but because they're right, and that rightness is too threatening to acknowledge. What makes loners particularly threatening is that they're not just observing, they're offering evidence of an alternative. Every time a loner chooses solitude over obligation and shows no guilt about it, every time they opt out of exhausting social performances and demonstrate genuine peace, they're proving that the mythology is optional. That you don't have to maintain draining relationships, that you don't have to show up to events that exhaust you, that you don't have to perform enthusiasm you don't feel. The loner's contentment in solitude exposes the hidden cost of constant connection. Their peace reveals the chaos others have normalized. Their refusal to participate in exhausting social rituals shows that participation was always optional. And people can't forgive them for that. Because if the loner can be genuinely content while refusing all the obligations everyone else resents but maintains, what does that say about everyone else's choices? It suggests they've been imprisoning themselves, that the exhaustion they feel is self-imposed, that they could stop performing and choose peace instead. But they can't consider that possibility without confronting everything they've sacrificed to maintain their current social structure, the relationships they've forced themselves to maintain, the events they've attended while wanting to be anywhere else, the enthusiasm they've performed while feeling drained. All of that sacrifice would be revealed as unnecessary, as self-imposed suffering rather than required social participation. The loner's existence makes that possibility visible, and that visibility is intolerable. So the loner must be wrong, must be missing something, must be incapable of real connection. Because if the loner is right, everyone else has been wrong about something fundamental. Society responds to this threat by pathologizing the observer. Not loners see something real about social dynamics, but loners are too cynical, too negative, reading too much into things. Not maybe there's truth in what they're noticing about our performances, but they just don't understand how connection works. They reframe the loner's clear seeing as defective perception, because accepting that loners are seeing accurately would require everyone else to confront what they're hiding. The resentment beneath their obligations, the exhaustion beneath their enthusiasm, the relief they feel when social demands end, the gap between their curated social lives and their actual experience of those lives. That confrontation is too costly, so instead they decide the loner is the one who's not seeing clearly. The loner is too isolated to understand, too removed to get it, missing something essential about human connection. The gaslighting is collective and automatic. Everyone agrees the loner doesn't see accurately because everyone needs to believe the loner doesn't see accurately. If they admitted the loner sees clearly, they'd have to confront what the loner is seeing. And what the loner is seeing is that most social connection operates on performance and obligation rather than genuine desire. That people are exhausting themselves maintaining relationships that don't fulfill them. That the social mythology everyone believes in contradicts the social reality everyone experiences. Those truths are too destabilizing, so the messenger must be discredited. The observer must be pathologized. The loner's clear seeing must be reframed as impaired vision. And everyone participates in this reframing because everyone benefits from it. As long as the loner is the problem, no one else has to examine their own exhausting social performances. There's psychological research on what's called emotional labor, the work of managing your own emotions to produce the desired emotional state in others. Service workers do it, teachers do it, and people do it constantly in social situations. They perform enthusiasm to generate enthusiasm. They fake interest to demonstrate interest. They manage their exhaustion to project energy. Researchers have found that emotional labor creates genuine psychological and physical costs. It depletes cognitive resources. It increases stress hormones. It leads to burnout. But here's what the research also shows. People who regularly engage in emotional labor often don't recognize they're doing it. They've normalized the performance so completely that they experience it as authentic. Except their bodies know the difference. The exhaustion is real even when they can't name its source. And loners see this dynamic playing out everywhere. They watch people perform emotional labor in their relationships, their friendships, their family obligations, and they notice the cost, even when the people paying it have stopped tracking the debt. The colleague who forces enthusiasm at team lunches goes home drained, that attributes the exhaustion to the workday rather than the performance. The family member who maintains cheerful availability resents the constant demands, but frames the resentment as personal failure rather than recognition of genuine cost. The friend who shows up to every obligation exhausted convinces themselves they're just tired, not that the obligations themselves are depleting. Loners observe this pattern clearly because they're not caught in it. They see the emotional labor, they notice the cost, they recognize the performance, and their recognition makes visible what everyone else needs to keep hidden. What loners see is that most social connection operates on performance rather than authenticity. People show up as the version of themselves that's expected rather than the version that's true. They perform interest in conversations that bore them. They generate enthusiasm for activities that drain them. They maintain relationships built on obligation rather than genuine affinity. And they do all of this while insisting their social lives are fulfilling, meaningful, essential to their well-being. The disconnect is staggering once you see it clearly. But most people can't afford to see it clearly because their entire identity is built on the belief that their social connections matter, that the time they invest in relationships is worthwhile, that the exhaustion they feel is just the normal cost of being a good friend, family member, colleague. Loners threaten this belief simply by existing contentedly outside these dynamics. They're not performing, they're not maintaining exhausting obligations, they're not showing up to events they don't want to attend, and they're fine. Better than fine, they're genuinely at peace. That peace exposes the performance everyone else maintains, and the exposure feels like an attack even when the loner never says a word. Because the loner's contentment suggests that all the performance, all the obligation, all the exhausting maintenance of draining relationships might be optional, that people could choose differently, that the sacrifice everyone makes might not be necessary. And if that's true, if the loner's peace proves that constant social performance isn't required for well-being, then everyone else has been suffering unnecessarily. They've been exhausting themselves for nothing. They've been performing for an audience that includes themselves, convincing themselves that the performance is authentic connection. The loner's existence makes that possibility undeniable, and people can't forgive that. So society punishes the clear-seeing, not through direct confrontation, but through systematic dismissal. Loners are framed as missing out, as not understanding, as unable to connect deeply. Their observations about social performance are dismissed as cynicism or bitterness. Their contentment in solitude is pathologized as avoidance or fear. The message is clear. If you see the pattern, if you notice the performance, if you observe the gap between what people claim and what they experience, keep it to yourself. Because pointing it out makes you the problem. Naming the exhaustion makes you negative. Observing the resentment makes you judgmental. Noticing the performance makes you cynical. The pattern must remain hidden for the system to function. Everyone must continue pretending that constant social engagement is inherently fulfilling, that relationships are always worth their cost, that showing up exhausted to obligations you resent is just what mature adults do. And anyone who sees through this pretense, anyone who opts out and demonstrates genuine peace, threatens the entire structure. So they're excluded, pathologized, dismissed. Their seeing is reframed as blindness. Their clarity is called confusion. Their peace is labeled concerning. The collective agreement to dismiss the loner protects everyone from having to confront what the loner sees. And that protection feels more important than truth, because the truth would require everyone to acknowledge that they are exhausted, that their relationships often feel like obligations, that they resent much of their social engagement while performing gratitude for it, that the gap between what they claim about their social lives and what they actually experience is massive. That's too much to confront, so the loner must be wrong, must be defective, must be missing something essential. The alternative, that the loner is seeing clearly and everyone else is in denial, is unacceptable. Here's the truth that makes people uncomfortable. Loners aren't antisocial, they're selectively social. They're not missing social cues, they're reading them too accurately. They see what others hide because they're not invested in hiding the same things. They notice the performance because they're not performing. And they're noticing, their clear seeing, their refusal to pretend that exhausting obligation is fulfilling connection, that becomes evidence of their dysfunction rather than evidence of their clarity. The system is designed to protect itself. If loners are seeing clearly, then everyone else is living in denial. If loners are content in solitude, then everyone else is exhausting themselves for nothing. If loners can opt out without suffering, then everyone else is participating in their own captivity. Those possibilities are too threatening to acknowledge. So instead, the loner must be the one who's wrong, the one who doesn't get it, the one who's missing something essential. The collective agreement to dismiss the loner's observations protects everyone from confronting what the loner sees. And that protection is more important than truth, because confronting the truth would require dismantling the entire framework people have built their lives around. It would mean acknowledging that much of their social engagement is performed rather than authentic, that many of their relationships are maintained through obligation rather than genuine desire, that they're exhausted not despite their social lives, but because of them, that the constant connection they've been told they need for well-being is actually depleting them. Those acknowledgments would require massive restructuring of how people live. It's easier to decide the loner is defective than to confront those truths. So that's what society does. It protects itself by pathologizing anyone who sees clearly enough to threaten the collective denial. If you're a loner who sees the pattern, who notices the exhaustion people hide, who catches the resentment beneath social obligations, who observes the gap between performance and reality, know that they will dismiss your seeing. They'll call it cynicism when it's clarity. They'll frame it as bitterness when it's observation. They'll pathologize your awareness as inability to connect. Because your clear seeing threatens their comfortable denial. Your refusal to participate in exhausting performances exposes their choice to keep performing. Your peace in solitude reveals the chaos they've normalized as connection. But what you see is real. The pattern exists whether they acknowledge it or not. The exhaustion is genuine even when they pretend it isn't. The resentment leaks through no matter how carefully they perform enthusiasm. You're not missing social cues, you're reading the ones everyone else has agreed to ignore. You're not cynical, you're honest about what connection costs most people. Stay clear, not because they'll ever validate your seeing, they won't. Your clarity threatens them too much. Stay clear because you've witnessed what most people spend their lives hiding from themselves, that much of social connection operates on performance and obligation rather than authentic desire, and that peace is possible outside that system. They can dismiss your observations, pathologize your solitude, insist you're missing something essential, but you know what you see, and what you see is real, even when everyone agrees to pretend it isn't.